Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Mark, and today is actually a pretty exciting day because I finally get to set my lower cabinets into the kitchen. So when we left off last week, we had set the tile in place and I was gonna get to work on the grout. Well, I didn't really care to film much of that because it's a lot of hands and knees work and it's no fun and it's not like I'm an expert, so what am I gonna teach you anyway? It took me about 4 hours to go back through and clean the thin set out between the grout lines so that I could get it really right. And then I came back another 4 hours to actually press the grout in and wipe it back off. And this is the result. This floor turned out great. It is almost dead flat, dead level across the whole thing. It came out so good, so much better than I was expecting. There's almost no wear. In fact, I'm gonna prove it. You can put no shoes on and slide your feet around, and I can feel the grout lines, but there's nowhere in here where I might stub a toe. All those tiles are in such good plane with each other. I'm really tickled with it. But that's not what we're doing today. Today, we're gonna set our lower cabinets in place. And to do that, the first step is to build up the toe boxes to the final height that they need to be. If you remember back to when we originally put the toe kicks in place, we leveled them to the highest point in the floor. So there's some pretty serious shims over here at the island, but here against the back wall, this is about sitting on the actual floor itself, and then we leveled everything out to that. But we just picked an arbitrary height to make these boxes with. I knew that my cabinet bodies were 30 inches tall exactly, and I knew that this floor was gonna come up somewhere. So I had 6 inches of slop to play with, including the thickness of the counter. So we have to work that in here. So with this, I just made these boards 3 inches exactly, set them in, we're done, we're good. Now, I know how high that tile comes up on the outside face of that board. And I already worked it out, but I'll show you how I did it. These strips are gonna be the framework that we have to add to the top of this to get the toe kick up to the proper height. To solve how thick these needed to be, I took all of the different things that would get stacked on top of here and then subtracted what they equaled from the 36-inch height that the cabinet has to be, and then that told me what this was gonna be. So these will get screwed on the top of these when we're done. I've got these cut out for the rest of the toe kicks as well. Then the cabinet goes on top of here. And then I know that the counter is gonna be 1.5 inches. So if I take this measurement and get myself to 33.5, and 1.5 inches to that is 35 inches. So that means these need to be right at 1 inch. I'm saying numbers pretty fast. It's actually like a couple of 16ths different. I don't want to say the real numbers out loud because it's too complicated for me to remember. But anyway, that's how I got this height. So now, what we'll do all the way around the kitchen is come back, and these are so close to square I had to mark which way was up and down and which way was side to side. These will go on here just like that. They'll get nailed and screwed down. These will then get attached to that, and now this is really the height. Then the cabinet gets put back on top of that, and the reason for the plywood is so that I can hit a stud through a nailing strip back here, but then I can just screw anywhere down through the bottom of the cabinet and hit something really solid and lock this thing in place for good. So with those spacers in, my plywood in, my original toe kicks in, my toe kick height is a hair high at 4.5 inches. And then my counter comes up to 34.5, the top of my cabinet, which means I have enough for, it's actually 34 5/8, which is exactly right because the counter is going to be 1 3/8. And that will then be dead nuts exactly on 3 feet, 36 inches tall. So now I need to go around with all of these sticks and attach them to all the toe kicks in the whole room, finish out those bases to the correct height, and then we can go back through with all the lowers and start securing them in place. It was on time-lapse mode. I addressed the camera and said lots of important stuff, and you can't hear any of that with a time-lapse. There's actually nothing important about what I just said. We can ignore all of it. This box is anchored to the wall. There's a stud there, and it's really solid already. There's one more stud here, so we'll run one more screw into that wall, and it'll be anchored in 2 different directions. I am not going to screw down into the toe kick cabinets until I get the subsequent ones kind of lined up with it. One butts up here. The next one has a trim piece that butts up here. I want these to be perfectly flush and set up and ready before I anchor it down, because there's a chance you might have to wiggle stuff a little bit and the distance from the wall might change a little bit to get it lined up. But that one's in. I'm going to grab the next one. There. This one I actually don't have a stud marked out. Let me look for that real quick. I'm not doing a great job of walking anybody through what I'm doing right here. It's a whole lot easier to just do it than it is to try to explain it. So I'd kind of forgotten about how much plumbing and electrical is behind this cabinet. There's a vent pipe that goes out up there. It took me a long time to get confident in where I could actually drill this hole and anchor it into a stud. So I just turned the camera off and got it done. These 2 are in. This one is solid with 1 screw in it. It is tied to this face frame. And then this one has a screw in the back wall. And this side is floating at the moment because we're going to attach the next cabinet to it and get this face perfect, and then we'll anchor the whole mess to the wall. So, because some of this material just isn't square, and probably the house isn't super square, this isn't lined up perfectly just yet. If I put a little bit of weight on there, I can get that just absolutely right. So that's where clamps come in. It took a little bit of finagling, but I got this seam flushed up really, really nice and clamped down. And now to keep it holding that way, we're just going to run some of these small head, these are trim screws, through the face frame just to hold it together. And because we are so close to the show face of this, I prefer to do a pilot hole. Because if anything were to split here, it would be, it'd make me really, really sad. Let's just leave it at that. Okay, that top is really nice and tight. And now I can kind of monkey with the bottom if I need to. Yeah, right there. And I kind of pick and choose which direction I run these in, this way or this way. This will be a drawer. You'll never really see this part. So if there's a tiny little screw head hole that you can see, well, you'll never see it. Over here, this ends up being a door, and you maybe could see that. So just kind of pick and choose which direction I'm running these things. There, should be nice and tight when I take the clamps off. Looks good, looks good. So now, this one has the stove up against it, so it can kind of just get mounted where it mounts, and it's the end of this line. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not even going to pretend that I have any idea where I last left off with telling this story, but the cabinets are all in place, locked in. They're solid as a rock, looking really nice. It's time to put the kind of decorative, they're not really decorative, they're just hackberry panels on the sides to kind of hide the infrastructure, to hide the stuff that doesn't look quite as nice. Now this is the one that's going to be up against the refrigerator. I started there. I already cut this one down to size. When that one gets put in place and slid up against the edge of this face frame, that's what we get. It looks really, really nice. And with the refrigerator here, it's going to bump out a couple more inches. And that's why I'm not notching this out. I'm actually leaving that solid like that. And then when we come to trim the inside of it, I'm going to put a 45-degree piece of trim here to make it easy to sweep out and around the fridge instead of sweeping through the toe kick and underneath the fridge. So that one's that. To get there, let's grab my pencil and we'll grab a clamp to be sure. I'm taking the full finished panel, dropping it in place, and butting it up against the face frame in the front here. I know this to be square and plumb, and I'm happy with that. So I'm going to clamp it right where I want it to be, just like that. Then I can come down to the ground level and go, that is not quite perfectly flush along the ground. The tile is maybe just a little bit unlevel, even though it looks really, really close. So what I'm going to do is just verify that I've got that the way I want it to be. Check along the back edge. And along the back edge of that cabinet, it's exactly perfect. It's just what I want. So I'm just going to take a pencil and slide it along the ground. And it's going to bump up right there on that piece of tile. And it's going to angle downward right there on that one. And then there's kind of a shoulder right there where there's grout. But this line now becomes where I need to go and cut this to make this thing fit perfectly on top of that tile. The other part, as long as this is already clamped in here and ready to go, we are going to remove the corner chunk here for the sake of the toe hooks. And the only reason for that, rather than doing a 45 here and sweeping it out, we can just sweep straight across and be fine. Either one of those would work just fine. The only reason I'm going to cut this out is the sake of stubbed toes. My thinking is that with open space around it, somebody might come through here knowing that there's, a toe kick under here. Somebody might be standing here, turn to go this way and kick a toe real hard right there. So I am going to notch this out for enough room to clear a toe. With that, talked about the 45 degree over here on the refrigerator side so that you can sweep out. That would work over here, and I do think I kind of like the look of this being solid down like that. But because of the danger of stubbing a toe, we're going to go with notching that out so that there's toe clearance. Now we've got that bottom edge trimmed to match the floor. And when I throw that in there like that, it looks about perfect. And then to do the top, I just take a pencil and run it along the top edge of this and give myself a line to follow. And this top edge is way less crucial because the counter is going to come over the top of this anyway, and no one's going to know if there's a little bit of a gap there. But we're going to make it as nice as possible using that reference line. Take a look at how cool that's going to be. The whole back side is going to end up looking like that, but it's going to be made up of 3 panels so that it can account for expansion and contraction. And that one's just clamped right in place right now. And if you look at this edge, when I get that tightened up, that's going to look great. I can't get a clamp on it, so this bottom doesn't quite look right. But when it pulls tight, it's going to look awesome. So where'd my pencil go? I need to scribe a line right here. One-handed, nailed it. That should be perfectly straight. I'm going to be able to cut it with a track saw. So we'll cut that off and then we'll anchor this. Now, I mentioned expansion and contraction. 3 panels, there'll be maybe 1/4 of an inch or more gap in between each one of them. And then there'll be a little bit of a decorative strip that goes over the top so that it can float behind that strip, but you'll never actually see that the gap is there. But because I like this corner and I want it to stay that way, we're going to anchor this corner really, really hard. So when this expands, it's going to push that way, not this way. I don't want it to grow out past this edge and end up seeing unstained material. If it goes that direction, if this pulls that way, it's not a big deal because all we'll see is the end grain, and you can see I did stain end grains of these things. But by anchoring it here and not so much here, it'll float that way and not out to where we could see it. But need to get that cut and put in, and then I think we will do the far end next, and then we'll trim the center one to fit. This one, I got lucky, is perfectly flat. I did not have to scribe the bottom. It just is really, really nice. So, time to cut. The material here for the back of the, I guess, inner cabinet is just 1/4 inch, and then it's rabbited into the frame. So putting nails here doesn't do me any good at all. But I have actually 1.5 inches of material here that'll make it really easy to anchor this edge to this. And then the other points of contact are just going to be across the top. And then the toe kick at the bottom is a 2x4, so that'll be super solid. We're going to start by just clamping it. Tap it over. Make sure it's sitting exactly where I want it to be sitting. And again, it's gonna move. I'm just trying to get it to move as little as possible and move in the direction that I want, since it's gonna happen regardless. So right there is really nice. I like it. I'm gonna clamp it down just so that it can't move on me while I'm trying to do this. Very nice. Very nice. Well, there we go. We've got one panel on each side, and we have the middle one left to do. Looks like I have a little bit of thin set. This will do it. Just a little bit of thin set down here on the toe kick that I might as well scrape out while I'm seeing it. It should help it sit a little flatter. Now, I cut these based on the exact measurement of this, so I don't expect this to fit. Oh, look at that. It fits exactly. But that kind of defeats the purpose of what we were going for here. I need it to expand and contract. We're going to put strips on here. As awesome as that looks right now to just be one great big piece, it's going to potentially rip itself apart later on. So I need to buy myself probably a 1/4 inch gap on either side. Got the last panel right here. I scribed the bottom and cut that to match the tile. I ripped off one edge and took about 3/8, 5/8. I took about 5/8 off of the overall width of it. So now I can have pretty decent gaps between them. These I actually just planed down real quick and cut, and I think those will end up being what the trim pieces look like. I think I will actually chamfer the edges of each of these so that people kicking their toes across here aren't going to find a sharp edge. But that's about 1/4 inch, and I can actually use that just to make sure that there's some space here, and it's a little bit more than 1/4, so these fit pretty floppy. But if I put it in there and try to gap it about right, that last panel sits really pretty nice. And put a clamp on there, and a clamp on there, just to have a quick look. We'll tack that in place, and this back is all done. That looks so much better though, doesn't it, than that horrible plywood that was there with all the holes. And then once we get these strips stained and done right, it'll cover that up and it'll look about like that. Gosh, I think that looks good. All right, nails. And just like that, our cabinet's looking pretty nice.